Welcome back! In part 1 of my look at clan strategies, I focused on clans Buchanan, Campbell, and Cunningham. In part 2, we looked at Ferguson, MacDonald, and McEwen. With this video, we'll discuss MacKenzie, Robertson, and Stewart. Alright, let's get into it. Clan MacKenzie gets the distinction of achieving the lowest average score among the top BGA players. The big disadvantage is that not only is there no first round benefit, but the second round benefit is also really small, given that typically you will only produce 2 whiskeys in the first round, maybe 3, if you have access to the basic port. The basic port is definitely a favorable port, as it helps you get whiskey down without having to put costly wheat down. But after using the port in the first round, you eventually have to get those expensive wheat fields down somehow, making it really challenging to get workers down. On average, the top BGA players are placing 6.5 workers down per game, by far the lowest of all the clans, with the other 8 clans combined averaging 7.5 workers per game. What you do get with MacKenzie is a very back-loaded benefit from storing whiskey in your cellar. The advantage of gaining 15 pounds in both round 4 and 5 when you bring your whiskey out is nice, but not quite enough to make up for the lack of income in earlier rounds. About storing whiskey in the cellar. As best I can tell, the top players rarely, if at all, move whiskey out before it completely ages. Let's do some math to see if it ever makes sense to remove whiskey early. First, let's look at the unit ROI table again, or return on investment, which was defined in the part 1 video. MacKenzie earns an extra 3 pounds for each whiskey produced, so let's update the table to account for that. In round 1, you produce a whiskey and put it into storage. In round 2, you can either leave the whiskey in storage and it will be worth an additional 7 pounds in round 3, or you could pull the whiskey out of storage and sell it for, let's say, 10 pounds, which is pretty typical for round 2. The question then is, can you use those 10 pounds to earn you more than the 7 pounds you would get by just leaving the whiskey in storage? At a market price of 10 pounds, the ROI needs to be greater than 70% for it to be worth selling the whiskey. Based on the chart, there are 3 entries close to the 70%, but the technology upgrade will be lower than 80% since you will likely have less than 4 of the same type of worker placed, and for the woodcutter and whiskey, the true ROI is lower if you include the hex costs. Realistically, the whiskey price needs to be at least 13 or 14 pounds to make it worth it, depending on hex costs. Oh, and this assumes that you have a merchant to spare. If you have to buy a merchant to sell the whiskey, then the whiskey price needs to be even higher. Alright, it's clear that we should leave the whiskey in storage for round 2, but what about round 3? Once again, the question is, can we earn 8 pounds by pulling the whiskey out and selling it? For the ROI equation, we need to account for the 7 pounds you get by pulling the whiskey out, so at a market price of 10 pounds, you get 17 pounds and need to earn 8 pounds with it that you would have gotten by just leaving the whiskey in storage for another round. That equates to an ROI of only 47%. I've already mentioned the caveats earlier about unit ROIs actually being lower because of hex costs and a need for buying an extra merchant, but here are 2 more. First, the price of processed goods typically drops in round 3 and rises in round 4, thereby increasing the value of holding on to the whiskey in the cellar. And second, you may need whiskey to complete a contract, which also makes holding on to the whiskey in the cellar better, so that you are not spending an extra turn buying whiskey in the next round. Anyways, if all that sounded confusing, then I can simply say that aging your whiskey completely is usually the right thing to do. Finally, there is really not a time when I would willingly go for this clan first. Out of 77 games in my database where top BGA players have played MacKenzie, only once was the clan chosen first. Even the disliked clan MacDonald was chosen 5 times. But I've got to help you look for something positive, so how about if there's a basic port and no process port, which depresses the price of whiskey? From the least loved clan to the most loved clan. Among top BGA players, this clan is easily the most popular and also has the largest average score by a surprisingly high margin. It also claims the maximum score across all games played in my database. How does Robertson do it? Robertson's advantage is based on delta expansions. Depending on the board layout, there can be anywhere between 18 and 32 deltas available on the 16 board layout combinations. More deltas mean more opportunities to get the £3 discount on an expansion. In one of my best games with Robertson, I managed to make 10 expansions in round 1, followed by 4 more expansions in round 2. Overall, I completed 29 expansions in the game. This clan has a very strong first round benefit that just keeps going throughout the game. But I didn't expand to every single delta on the board. One useful strategy is to place animals on the deltas and then choose contracts that require slaughtering those animals. If you can secure a delta 1 hex that others cannot get to, then you can expand to that hex repeatedly, thereby slaughtering a £6 sheep or £7 cow worth about £10 in the contract. Add the animal slaughter glory tile and you have a very powerful combination. Add the 5-6 hex glory tile with a lot of deltas and you are nearly unbeatable. That's my best starting condition for this clan, but really a large number of deltas will suffice. The main disadvantage is when there are relatively few deltas. Even worse is when several of them are next to a weak port, like the trading port. And just for fun, check out how the unit ROIs for Robertson change if you expand onto a delta. Simply outstanding! Okay, that brings us to our last clan, Clan Stewart, who claims the second highest average score after Robertson. To do well with Clan Stewart, you need to play the trading game. First, let's look at the estimated monetary benefits. I'm using the best case scenario where there is both a processed goods and a basic goods port, and you are the first person to reach the processed goods port so that you can sell whiskey first. If there is only one port or you are not selling whiskey, then the benefit will be £2 to £4 less. The simplest case is to use the processed goods port to convert your good to 2 whiskey and you sell them both for £23. Note that because you start with 1 shipping, you can usually get to that port before others. So let's add a £2 benefit since you can sell the pricier whiskey as opposed to cheese or bread. Then you use the basic goods port to convert your good into a grain and 2 milk. And then you sell the grain for £6 and the first milk for £6, and then you sell the second milk for another £6. 4 separate trades earned you £4, but the 3 extra merchants earned £15 that you would not have otherwise been able to get. Add £16 of value because of the 3 merchants and 1 shipping that you start with, and the total first round value is an astounding £37. That is the highest of all the clans. And just like Robertson, this is the benefit that applies every round. Suppose that you can make 5 separate trades each round. That makes the second round benefit worth £5 and the overall benefit worth £57. So, for this clan's advantages, starting with extra merchants means selling extra goods for income in the first round, and the extra shipping means getting to key locations like the processed port before your opponents. In addition, you can arbitrage in trading. For example, suppose you have £3 left over at the end of a round and a merchant to spare. If the market price of wool is at £4, you can buy it for £3, and in the next round sell it for £5, netting you £2. Not much of a gain, but it is £2 more in a strategy that is not available for other clans. The big disadvantage is if neither goods port is in play. Your first round benefit drops to £14 since you don't have the goods to make use of 2 merchants. So, the best starting condition is when either or both of the basic and processed goods ports are in play. Interestingly, 24 out of the top 29 scores for the top BGA players playing Stewart had the processed goods port in play. And surprisingly, only 9 out of the 29 had the basic port. I want to finish by bringing together the estimated monetary benefits across all the clans and make some observations in comparison. First, some clans have benefits that are front-loaded, while others have them back-loaded. Getting the engine going in the first round is so important to having a good game. So despite the amazing ability for Cunningham to generate income, on an average score basis, it cannot catch up to Robertson or Stewart. Second, For every clan, except for Ferguson, there were ports or board layouts that helped a clan be better than its average. Finally, this analysis of clans is based on 3-player games. Most of what applies at 3 players also applies to 2 and 4-player games, but there are some adjustments to consider. In a 2-player game, some clans like Ferguson and Robertson have reduced abilities. In a 4-player game, expansions are more difficult and thus more expensive because of an additional player occupying spaces, so that changes the ROI as achievable. Well, I hope that this look at strategies for individual clans was informative. Thank you for watching and listening to this video. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments and check out more Clans of Caledonia strategy videos in the links below. Happy playing!